As requested, here's the lowdown on the Kross Vocoder. The obvious starting point is, what's a vocoder? Well, in the 1930s, telecommunications scientists wanted to convert an analogue telephone signal into a digital one. By doing this, they could convert a human voice into a system of electronic ones and noughts and send it along a telephone line. They could then reassemble it at the other end, and what would be heard would be an exact representation of what was sent without all of the interference and noise that gets picked up with an analogue telephone. Now, early synth pioneers got hold of this technology when they realised that it made some interesting noises, and the voice coder, or vocoder, was born. Now, what is known as a carrier signal, which is typically your voice, is input through the vocoder's circuitry, and it's used to modify or modulate a synthesized sound, known as a modulator. Typically, you'll have a synth sound on the Kross, and your vocal will be fed alongside it through the vocoder, and the vocoder circuitry will use the vocal signal to mess with the synth sound to produce an output that has all the characteristics of your voice, as well as the synth. The robot voices you hear on ELO's Mr. Blue Sky and Queen's Radio Gaga are obvious examples of the vocoder in use. In very simple terms, the human voice has what is known as formants. When we speak, we each generate different levels of acoustic energy at different frequencies. It's this unique voice print which allows us to differentiate between one voice and another. So Madonna's voice has more high frequency content than Pavarotti's, for example, and adult voices sound different to children because the formants are at different frequencies due to size, weight, the way we use our vocal cords, lungs and head to actually produce sounds. That's the theory, but let's see how it works on the Kross. Firstly, you're going to need a dynamic microphone. Now, if you've got a fancy condenser mic or anything else that needs a power supply, it ain't going to work because the Kross can't power it. So if your mic has also a 3-pin connector like that, you're going to need an adapter to turn it into a jack connector. So you need something like that. First thing to do is plug your mic into the back, into the socket marked mic, and select a vocoder preset. The Combi vocoder delay MW is probably as good a place to start because it will give you the characteristic vocoder sound of the 1980s. You need to press the audio in button, which is just to the left of the main screen. And if you press a few keys, the first thing you'll note is absolutely nothing happens. Now, the reason for that is because although there's a modulator, a synth sound, there's no carrier. There's actually nothing to actually have an effect on the synth notes you're playing. But if you press a key and actually sing into the microphone at the same time, instant Wendy Carlos from Clockwork Orange. When you go into the editing page for the Combi, you'll see a CH setting. Leave it alone for the time being. That will affect how the vocoder works on different MIDI channels, and you can adjust it, but for the time being we'll just leave it on general so it'll play across the whole of the Combi. The carrier trim and the modulation trim are the next controls. The trim controls set the volume level of your vocal, the carrier signal, and the level of the modulator signal that are going into the vocoder. That's the synth sound that that vocal is going to modulate. The next thing you can adjust is the mod.src. Now, the modulation source, as that's known, can be set to either input, FX Control 1 or FX Control 2. What this is doing is basically routing the synth signal that your vocal is going to mess with, either through Master Effects 1 or Master Effects 2, or it's simply avoiding it altogether. Here's the original setting with the original Doppler and sequence BPM delays on the Master Effects. Oh, excuse the plane. I've changed one of the settings on the Master Effects. And what you can hear is a chorus and a flanger with some overdrive and high gain on it, so it's a slightly different signal. That one's got phaser on it, but you can still hear the delay. That's a completely different delay. That's me messing with the Master Effects. So you can see what those settings are doing. The next control in line is the mod select. This can be set to L and R mix, L only or R only. And this is basically applying the affected sound to either one side or the other, or stereoing in both. The format SFT or format shift emphasizes different frequencies in the vocal. Set at -2, you'll get more bass frequencies emphasized when you play the keys. Set it at +2 and you'll emphasize the treble frequencies. This is at -2. This is +2. Carrier noise is a neat feature that allows you to add some white noise to your vocal input, and it's a feature that is available on a lot of hardware vocoders and soft vocoders that you may use on your PC. And it's useful because you can make your sound even more robot-like. But you can also use AMS, or alternate modulation sources. In other words, you can control the way that white noise cuts in with a number of different buttons, dials, pedals, and you can choose which one. And the carrier noise is basically the amount of noise that you can add. Don't go too crazy with that, because if you wind it up too high it'll create some horrible hiss and feedback. I've got it presently set at 14. Now the SRC is basically the source. Now that's the alternate modulation source. You've got plenty of different choices that you can make in terms of controlling it. And I've initially set this to tempo, so the tempo knob will actually control the amount of noise. At the moment I've got the tempo knob wound full. Can't get my hands around it. That's shifting the tempo knob to introduce more white noise. Now I could have set that to the mod wheel, for example, and had that changing the amount of white noise. I could have used a sustain pedal, a foot pedal, and introduced it while I've still got both hands free. So that's the beauty of AMS. That's what you can do with AMS. You could create some interesting hissing and robot type noises by introducing that white noise. The next setting you'll see is the mod high mix. This basically adds more high end to your sound, so the sound of your voice will start to become slightly clearer. So this is it set on 0. You can hear that slightly clearer, edgier sound as it lets more sibilance through. The final control is the wet-dry mix, which basically controls the balance between the affected signal and the clean signal. So you can adjust that again to taste as to how much you want to hear your voice and how much you want to hear the affected signal. Now AMS applies here again in that you can control the wet and dry balance with alternate modulation sources or different controls. For example, your AMS control could be mod wheel, pitch wheel, it could be foot controller, and you can create some dynamic changes within your performance, especially if you're using foot pedals, because you've still got your hands free. And that's the beauty of having AMS. The important thing to remember is that since the vocoder settings on the program and the combi lists are like normal programs and combis, you can treat them like any other normal programs and combis, and you can adjust loads of different settings as well as those I've just discussed. So you can add more insert effects, you can add different master effects. For example, the vocoder delay MW combi also has a talking modulator added as an insert effect, so pressing switch 1 will adjust the octave and switch 2 will add some weird portamento effects, so you can mess with the pitch. Anyway, that's the vocoder, and that's what should have been in the manual. Have some fun with it.